When the funeral bells echoed through the empty chapel, I realized it wasn't my husband who had truly died. It was my family. Amid the scent of cedar and the yellowed letters he left behind, I found a revenge that needed no blood. A revenge forged from clarity, from the quiet peace I had spent an entire lifetime earning. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Maggie Allen. I'm 78 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. They say sorrow has its own sound. The scrape of a wooden chair against the floor, the clearing of a throat trying to swallow words, the rustle of hymn pages turned by trembling fingers. But this morning, in the small chapel in Portland, sorrow made no sound. It was a thick fog covering my chest, making every breath heavy as stone. The dark wooden coffin lay still beneath the cross, so polished it reflected my face in the scent of cedar, the fragrance that had followed Robert all his life, on his sweaters, in his bookshelves, in the study where he sat late into the night. Now, that scent felt like an invisible embrace tightening around my heart. Last night, I called our 2 children. David's voice on the line was cold and rushed. "Work crisis, Mom. I'm in the middle of a deal. I'll send flowers, okay?" Between his words, I could hear the clacking of a keyboard, the squeak of a chair, as if he were speaking to the world, not to his mother. I hung up before I could say that his father had never been late for anything, not even for life itself. I called Claire. She was silent for 2 seconds, then said, "I'll try my best, Mom, but I need to prioritize my schedule." Prioritize. A word thin as a blade, slicing through all tenderness. I answered, "Yes, I understand." But I understood more than ever. When people need to prioritize their schedule, they rarely prioritize family. This morning, the chapel had flowers, candles, a priest, and a quiet funeral director moving about. And there were front row seats reserved for family, empty, cold. I looked at them long enough to almost see David's and Claire's names stuck on the backrests with glue that had long dried. Duty. The priest read the prayers, his voice deep like water dripping from a roof. I couldn't hear every word, only felt each one fall into me like a pebble. The coffin seemed to grow longer each time I looked, as if Robert were making room for all the years we had lived. The borrowed car for our honeymoon, the first winter when we couldn't afford to fix the heater, his laughter when I burned dinner, the smell of coffee drifting across the porch, and the gentle squeeze of his hand whenever I fumbled. If I opened the lid, perhaps I would find his notebook of beef stew recipes, the gardening gloves torn at the index finger, and the old oil-stained apron. Evidence of a simple but complete life. When Amazing Grace began, I tried to sing, but my throat was dry as gravel. When he was alive, Robert always sang offbeat but loudly, believing that if he sang loud enough, God would hear him first. Now only I remained, my voice lost and weak, breaking beneath the chapel dome. No one listened, no one leaned down. They only bowed their heads, polite but cold. I leaned closer and whispered to the wooden lid. He was never late for anything, not even his own funeral, apparently. The only things missing today are the people we paid for the seats. No one answered, only the sound of wind slipping through the door crack, carrying the scent of wilted lilies. After the service, a neighbor came near and touched my hand. "They'll come around, Maggie. The kids are busy." Busy, the polite way to say absent. I nodded, holding her hand longer than necessary, borrowing a little warmth from a stranger. Outside, it was cold enough to see my breath. The hearse rolled away slowly, as if even time bowed its head. I stood watching until the tail disappeared into the mist. Walking to my old Camry, I placed my hand on the passenger seat, where Robert used to sit, where he adjusted the radio to find old songs. "They didn't come, Rob," I whispered. In my mind, he laughed. "Let them be, Mags. They'll regret it." But I knew, if he were alive, he would be sad too. For Robert, being present was always the proof of love. The road home was longer than usual. Rain drew long streaks on the windshield, the wipers sweeping in rhythm with a tired heart. The city shrank, grayer, lower. Each red light seemed to last 10 beats longer. In the rear-view mirror, I saw an old woman with silver hair gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if letting go would send her whole life sliding down the hill ahead. When I reached home, I didn't get out right away. The porch was the same, the fern drooping, the doormat askew. There was a time when every morning meant 2 cups of coffee, one black for Robert, one with milk for me. He'd lean sideways, read the paper, tell me about the squirrel in the yard, last night's game. I once thought those small things dull. Now I know they were the threads that held marriage together. The door opened, and the scent of cedar rushed out, embracing me as if his shadow still lingered. In the kitchen, 2 cups still sat ready, 2 silver spoons lying side by side, the sugar jar full. The house was tidy to the point of absurdity, a stage with all its props, but no audience ever arriving. The clock read 12:47. The day still had hours, but life had lost its rhythm. I picked up the phone, thought of calling Claire, then didn't. She would probably send a white flower emoji. David would write, "Checking in." 3 words as light as a knock from someone with no intention of entering. I tore up the paper listing the menu prepared for the guests, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. Thud. A full stop placed right where it belonged. Outside, the rain kept falling, long streaks underlining what I didn't want to read. I had not only lost my husband, I had lost the image of my family. I walked down the hallway, touching the Christmas photo from 15 years ago. Robert's arm around my shoulder, David raising a glass of wine, Claire half smiling, and Evan, my nephew, grinning brightly, showing his missing teeth. Back then, I believed it was love. Now I know it was only a frozen moment of something already cracking. I sat down in the armchair, my hands clasped together. The house creaked softly, like an old creature trying to keep warm. I called softly, "Robert." No one answered, but the walls seemed to listen. A thought fell, light as dust yet heavy as stone. Absence has a price, and today I have paid it in full. At night, I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then poured one down the sink. Steam rose, fading into the air, a small ritual for what was lost. You left, and I stayed. Maybe that's the hardest part, I said. Inside, nothing collapsed anymore. Only deepened, like a dry well without a bottom. I turned off the kitchen light and looked at the wooden fence Robert had built years ago. He once promised to replace it after the rains. He never had the chance. I thought of tomorrow, the drawer labeled estate papers waiting. Perhaps it was time to open it, even just to find a piece of old meaning. I went back to the chair, stroked the hand-knit blanket that still held the scent of wool. Closing my eyes, I heard his shoes scuffing on the floor, his soft cough, before saying something serious, and his gentle scolding. "Drive slow, Mags." Those sounds stitched the tear in my heart. When I opened my eyes, I saw neither hope nor forgiveness, only clarity. Robert was gone, and the children had each left in their own way. But I was still here. The room grew half a degree warmer. I went to turn off the lights, pausing before the wedding photo. A young woman holding white flowers, a young man looking at her as if the whole world lived in her smile. I touched the frame and whispered, "He was never late for anything." Night fell. Rain tapped on the roof like someone knocking softly, just to remind me I was still alive. Before sleeping, I told myself, sometimes endings are only silences no one notices. In that silence, life quietly shifts, adding nothing, taking nothing away, only settling into its rightful place. Tomorrow, I will brew a cup of coffee just for myself, open that drawer, and call my own name out loud. I am not only mom or grandma, I am Maggie, and I'm still here, ready to begin the rest of my life, in a house that still smells of cedar, with empty chairs bearing witness to a love that once was real. When I opened the door and stepped in, the house still smelled of cedar, a scent that was half consolation, half a reminder that Robert was still here in his own way. It mingled with the stale coffee lingering in the machine, a fragrance both familiar and piercing. I stood in the kitchen, keys still in my hand, listening to the ticking clock as if it were counting the hollow beats of an emptiness. I set my purse on the table and looked around the kitchen, tidy to excess. Every cup, every plate, every napkin lay exactly in its place, as though I myself were afraid that if they strayed, he wouldn't be able to find his way home. I opened the refrigerator and saw Robert's favorite jar of strawberry jam still half full, with 2 months left before it expired. I let out a small laugh, short, dry, and sharp, as if even I couldn't believe I could still make such a sound. I placed my hand on the countertop, cold and smooth, and blurted out, "You left too fast, Rob." No one answered. Only the heater clicked on, then off. I turned, my eyes pausing on the photo on the shelf. Robert in his gardening clothes, holding a saw, his smile kind. Next to it was another picture. Our family, one Christmas long ago. Back then, I hadn't known a smile could be an early goodbye. I walked to the sink and washed the coffee cup still stained from the morning. Cold water slipped through my fingers, bringing a feeling both alert and stinging. I set the cup on the rack, turned to the cupboard, and reached for the leftover bottle of Merlot. Robert used to say red wine should only be drunk when you're happy. But today, I drank to remember. I poured half a glass and carried it into the living room. The cedar scent was stronger here because of Robert's bookcase. Its door was still ajar, inside lined with dozens of novels he had read over and over. On the table, his reading glasses still lay where he'd taken them off the night before. His heart stopped. I sat in his armchair and leaned my head back. The feel of my scalp against the worn wool brought back every evening when he read the paper. I knitted, and Evan, our grandson, lay on the floor, scribbling giant fish. It had been a long time since this room had held that laughter. I sipped the wine. A slight bitterness spread across my tongue. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled without thinking. And that's when I saw Claire's post. A glossy brunch photo with 3 friends, captioned, "Girls Brunch, Living My Best Life." Below were dozens of comments, hearts, laughing faces, clinking champagne glasses. Amid all that laughter, I saw myself, erased from the world my daughter was living in. My fingers tightened around the glass until the knuckles went white. 1,000 jumbled sounds rang in my head. The funeral bells, Portland's rain, Claire's happy laughter in the photo, and me, sitting here in a house thick with cedar and shadow. The glass in my hand shook. The dark red liquid smeared the edge of the table. I let the glass fall. The wine spilled, spreading into a long streak like a wound. I looked at it, didn't wipe it up, didn't speak. There are moments when one cannot cry, not because there are no tears left, but because the pain has frozen into stillness. I sat there for a long time. Rain began to lash against the window. The house grew colder, and I heard my heartbeat go ragged. Then, as if by reflex, I took a cloth and wiped up the spilled wine, folded the cloth neatly, and put it back in order. I had grown used to tidying grief away, hiding it so others wouldn't see. I sat back down and looked at the family frame again. The faces in it suddenly felt unfamiliar. I whispered, "Maybe they don't belong to this house anymore, Rob." I stood, went to the kitchen, and took out a pan. I don't know why, but my hands automatically gathered the ingredients for Robert's favorite dish: old-fashioned stew with a bit of red wine and bay leaves. Each motion felt guided by habit, not feeling. I stirred, waiting for the smell of meat to blend with the old cedar. But instead of warmth, it clenched my heart. When the stew bubbled, I looked up at the empty dining table. 2 plates, 2 sets of cutlery laid straight, as if he had just stepped out for a moment. I pulled out a chair and sat, staring at the seat across from me. I wanted to believe he was still there, smiling, telling me to add more salt. But the chair only sat there, cold, with no reply. I lifted a piece of meat, chewed, then stopped. The taste wasn't the same. Perhaps because someone was missing, or perhaps because I was no longer who I had been in those years. I set the spoon down, took a deep breath, and said slowly, as if speaking to myself, "Maybe grief doesn't run in families. Maybe it stops where comfort begins. I spent 55 years being their mother. Now I need to be Maggie." The words came out bare and true. I had never spoken my own name with such clarity. In the small kitchen, amid cedar and kitchen smoke, I saw more clearly than ever. I had spent a lifetime keeping a thing no one else wanted to keep. I stood, took the remaining glass of wine out to the porch, and sat in the wicker chair Robert used to use. The rain kept falling, soft as an old lullaby. I lifted my eyes to the dense gray sky and listened to the water beating on the tin roof. Inside, the house was so quiet, I could hear the second hand moving. Beat by beat, second by second. I breathed deeply. The sense of cedar and wine mixed. Something in me had just cracked, but without a sound. It was only recognition that I didn't need to seek forgiveness. I needed clarity. I needed to look back at my life without the blur between love and duty. I went back in and picked up the small notebook on the table, the one Robert used for to-dos. On the last page, in his handwriting, "Remind David to call. Tell Claire to visit." I ran my hand over the line. The ink had smudged at one corner. "You've reminded them, Rob," I said softly. "But they won't listen." I set the notebook back in its place and blew out the candle on the table. The light guttered out, leaving only the smell of smoke and wood. I stood still, empty but brighter. Perhaps, for the first time in years, I felt truly lucid. I walked to the window and looked through the rain-fogged glass, seeing my reflection faint in the frame. A widowed woman, 78, who had lost her husband and her illusions. But somewhere in that reflection, I saw a small glimmer, the fragile light of someone beginning again. I murmured as a promise to myself, tomorrow, I'll find clarity, not forgiveness. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady as a hand tapping lightly on the earth, signaling that a new chapter was waiting to be opened. I couldn't sleep. The rain fell all night, steady, like the breathing of someone long accustomed to loneliness. Each drop that struck the roof made me think of Robert, of how he always reached over to switch off the light before I did, saying, "Sleep, Mags, tomorrow will be better." But this morning, the sky was still gray, and he was no longer here to lie to me. I made coffee, just 1 cup. The old habit of 2 had become a ritual for 1. The scent of coffee mingled with the lingering cedar, blending like 2 souls unwilling to part. I drank slowly, watching the dim light beyond the window. Something stirred inside me, a feeling half uneasy, half curious. When Robert died, I had left everything of his untouched. His small study where he used to sit and jot notes, the desk cluttered with papers, the drawers slightly ajar beneath a thin layer of dust. Today, for reasons I couldn't name, I wanted to go in. Maybe because I needed to feel close to him once more, or maybe because I could no longer bear avoiding the dark corners of this house. I opened the door, the air filled with a thick scent of old paper and cedar wood. Everything was as it had been the day he died. His notebook still open, a pen wedged between its pages, his reading glasses askew, atop a folder labeled Estate Papers. I placed my hand on the edge of the desk, then sat down. The right-hand drawer held nothing but bank statements, letters, medical bills. I arranged them, smoothing each page. The paper's chill made my fingers tremble. The middle drawer had smaller things, a photo of Robert and me when we were young, a birthday card from David sent in 1998, a few old silver coins he once called lucky. But when I opened the last drawer, the one he rarely let me touch, I found a thick folder labeled Estate Papers in his handwriting. I was about to put it back when a small sheet of paper slipped from its edge, yellowed, folded in half in that familiar slanted script. I unfolded it. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say it. I know that lately, between us and the kids, there's been a distance I don't know how to close. I'm afraid to say this because I don't want to hurt you. You've always believed everything is fine, but I can't pretend I don't see it. David only visits when he needs financial help. Claire avoids calls that don't bring good news. Something is slipping away from us, Mags, and I'm afraid that one day you'll be the only one left in this house. I hope I'm wrong. I sat still. My eyes stayed on the last line. I hope I'm wrong. The paper trembled in my hands, not from the wind, but from the feeling that he was still here, in every word, in the regret he had carried but never spoken. I set the paper down. Tears fell before I realized it. Not a sobbing cry, just a few slow drops, landing on the page, smudging the word hope. Robert had known, long ago, and he had chosen silence to preserve my illusion that the family was still intact. I folded the letter and held it in my hand. It felt like finding a confession, not of guilt, but of truth someone had kept safe for me too long. I opened the estate papers folder. Inside was an old will, clearly stating, joint beneficiaries, David Allen and Claire Allen. I stared at the line for a long time. 2 names that once filled me with pride now weighed on my chest like stone. They would split everything evenly. They would come, not out of love, but for the inheritance. I let out a small, brittle laugh, echoing in the quiet room. The only thing they still share, I said, is their indifference toward me. My hand rested on the stack of papers, feeling the cold metal of the drawer handle. I suddenly remembered something Robert once told me. I don't ever want you to have to choose between forgiveness and dignity, because sometimes they're the same. I hadn't understood then. Now I was beginning to. I whispered, "You were wrong about their love, Rob, but I will be right about our legacy." I stood and went to find the phone. The dim Portland morning light filtered through the curtains, falling across our wedding photo on the wall. We were smiling in white, hand in hand, young and foolish. I pressed a finger against his face in the photo. "You were afraid I'd get hurt," I said. "But silence is what hurt me most." I turned back to the desk, looked at the letter one last time, then picked up the phone. My fingers trembled slightly, but the motion was steady. I found the number for Mark Peterson, Robert's lawyer, the one who had helped us draft everything 5 years ago. The phone rang 3 times before the familiar voice answered. "Peterson here." I drew a breath and spoke slowly. "Mark, this is Maggie Allen. I'd like to schedule a meeting as soon as possible about the will." There was a short pause on the line. "Maggie, are you sure? You want to make changes?" "I don't want to change it, Mark," I said. "I want to make it right." When I hung up, my hand felt lighter, as if a weight of years had slipped from my shoulders. I looked around the room that had held so much of 2 lives. Now, it held only the smell of cedar and an unkept promise. I stepped out, closing the door softly behind me. The click of the latch was small, yet in my head it sounded like the knock that begins a new chapter. I used to think pain made me weaker. Turns out, it only made me clearer. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The gray Portland light spread across the table. On it lay just one note. The final words of a man who once believed in goodness. "I hope I'm wrong." I stared at that line for a long time, then said quietly, "No, Rob, you were right. And I'll be the one to finish this story, in the way you feared, but should have let me long ago." That morning, Portland lay under a thick blanket of fog, heavy as an old quilt pressed over the city. The light beyond the window was so timid, it felt as though the sun itself wasn't ready to face the day. I sat at the dining table, hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee. The steam rose, blurred, then disappeared, like everything in my life, evaporating before I ever noticed it was gone. The scent of cedar still hung in the house, as if Robert hadn't quite left yet. Every morning, I still found myself talking to him, though I knew there would be no reply. Only the ticking of the wooden clock, repeating itself like a reminder that time waits for no one, not even those still learning how to forget. On the table lay Robert's note, the last line he wrote, "I hope I'm wrong." I'd read that sentence countless times, and this morning, I no longer feared admitting it. He had been right. I stood, pulled on my gray sweater, and wrapped an old silk scarf around my neck. Today, I had a meeting with Mark Peterson, the family lawyer. I knew I was about to do something I'd never imagined years ago. Not out of vengeance, but because I could no longer live with a legacy built on pretense. The road to downtown was quiet. Portland was still damp from rain, water streaking the car windows, reflecting blurred red brick buildings. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rear view mirror. An old woman with silver hair, eyes that no longer sought sympathy, I wasn't Robert's wife or David and Claire's mother anymore. I was simply Maggie, a woman holding on to the last edge of her clarity. Mark's office was on the third floor of an old building with creaking wooden stairs. His name was etched on the glass door in faded gold lettering. When I pushed the door open, the scent of paper, ink, and dry pine filled the room, reminding me of the days Robert and I had come here to draft our will. Back then, he'd held my hand and joked, "When one of us goes first, the other will know what to do." I had laughed. Now the line sounded like a grave instruction he'd left behind. Mark stood when he saw me. He looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, gentler eyes, tinged with sadness. "Maggie," he said, "I'm so sorry about Robert. He was one of the finest clients I've ever had." "I know," I replied, sitting down. "But I'm not here today out of sorrow. I'm here to make something right." He opened the old file, flipping through a few pages. "Robert left everything split evenly between your two children, correct?" "Yes. He wrote that when he still believed they loved us." Mark looked up, his gaze cautious. "And now you don't believe that?" I took a slow breath. "No. I believe real love doesn't forget you on the day of your funeral. I'm not angry at David or Claire. I just see things more clearly now. That some people only remember family when inheritance is mentioned." Mark watched me for a long moment, then asked quietly, "You want to change the beneficiaries?" "I want to choose again. I've thought about it carefully, Mark. I want everything transferred to Evan." "Evan?" His brows lifted slightly. "Your grandson?" "Yes. He's 19, has nothing but honesty. He didn't come asking for anything, only to check if I was okay. I want to leave things to the one who still remembers to care, not to those who only remember to plan." He nodded slowly. "Maggie, most people your age choose forgiveness, not clarity." I smiled faintly. "I'm not choosing revenge, Mark. I'm choosing who deserves the love we built. Forgiveness is something people can exploit. Clarity, they can't." The room went still. Mark lowered his eyes and began writing. I looked toward the window. The sky was the color of lead, a few small birds crossing it like ink strokes on a cold page. Something moved inside me, both ache and peace. "Would you like to sign today?" Mark asked. "I want it all finalized this week, before I change my mind." He nodded. "I'll rewrite everything. Would you like me to contact Evan?" "Yes, and change my emergency contact too. Replace David with Evan." He looked up and smiled faintly. "Understood." The pen scratch echoed softly in the office, like the sound of an old wound being stitched closed. When I read Evan Allen listed as the beneficiary, I felt myself exhale. Robert once said, "Legacy isn't money, it's what people remember about you." Now I understood that completely. Leaving the office, I walked slowly down the street. Portland's wind was cold and damp, curling around the collar of my sweater. I didn't feel lonely anymore. Maybe because, for the first time in months, I was walking without an illusion. When I got home, I hung my coat, sat in Robert's armchair. The afternoon light fell across our wedding photo, illuminating his face as if he were still smiling. I pulled an old notebook from the drawer, flipped to a random page. In the middle, in his handwriting, "Don't do everything alone." I laughed, tears spilling before I could stop them. "You were right again, Rob. But this time, I'm doing it for me, not for them." The phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Mom, sorry about missing the funeral. Things are insane at work. I'll call soon." I looked at the text, felt no anger, no pain. I just pressed delete, not out of hatred, but because I no longer wanted to hold on to emptiness. Outside, the sky began to drizzle. I stood, brewed a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The soft tapping of rain on the roof brought a strange calm. I thought of Evan, the only grandchild who ever visited, not out of duty, but affection. He didn't yet know about today's decision. And maybe he didn't need to. True love never requires an announcement. Late in the afternoon, the phone rang again. It was Evan. "Grandma?" His voice trembled slightly. "I heard about Grandpa. I'm sorry I couldn't make it back." I smiled. "That's all right, Evan. You just did what everyone else forgot. You called." He was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Are you okay?" I looked at the rain sliding down the glass. "Better than ever, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to lose everything to see what you still have." When the call ended, I sat for a long while. In the room washed in golden dusk, I could see every tiny speck of dust drifting through the light, shimmering like memories in motion. I wondered if Robert could see it too. Maybe he'd smile, proud that I had finally chosen clarity over forgiveness. I stood and opened the window wide. The wind rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and damp earth, mingling with the old cedar. I breathed deeply, feeling as though the whole house was being cleansed. "Goodbye, Rob," I whispered. "I'm keeping the promise you were too kind to make." Outside, the rain fell steady and soft, like an answer. I lifted my eyes to the silver gray sky. There are afternoons like this, so quiet you can hear your heart changing direction. And I knew that today, I had just done that. I was no longer searching for forgiveness. I had chosen something rarer: clarity. That morning, Portland was unusually still. No rain, only a thin veil of mist stretched across the window, softening the light until it looked pale as memory. I sat at the dining table, hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee, listening to the clock tick. Each movement of the hands was slow, as if reminding me that there was still time. Just no one left to count it with. On the table lay the new will Mark had sent last night. I had signed it, sealed it, read it 3 times. Everything in it was tidy and precise, just as Robert had always been. But inside that neatness, I could hear something small, the quiet snap of a string that had once tied me to David and Claire. I didn't know how they would react when they found out. Perhaps they'd be angry. Perhaps they'd say I'd lost my mind. But I no longer wanted to explain myself. A lifetime of motherhood had already worn me down enough from trying to be understood. I left the table and went into Robert's study. That little room was now the last refuge of memory. The scent of cedar, old paper, and a faint trace of tobacco clung to the curtains. Every time I stepped inside, I felt as though I were wandering through my own past. On the desk was a thick folder, its hard cover labeled "The Allen Legacy." I traced the words he had written in black marker. My fingers moved along the creases, feeling the patience in each stroke of ink. Robert had always believed that everything could be preserved through order, that life would stay peaceful if it was kept in its proper place. But some things never stay still, no matter how hard one tries, like hearts or kinship. I opened a drawer. Inside were stacks of papers: David's college tuition bills, Claire's medical forms, bank statements, decades of insurance receipts. I once thought those things were proof of love. Every number, every payment, a quiet act of sacrifice. Now, looking at them, they felt more like traces, records of a love gradually spent over time. Amid the pile, I found a small cardboard box, its edges yellowed with age. I opened it, expecting more receipts, but at the bottom was a folded letter, written in the uneven scrawl of a child. I recognized it instantly, Evan's handwriting. The paper was a little crumpled, the corner dotted with crumbs. The first line made me smile, then fall silent. Dear Grandma and Grandpa, I love coming to your house because it smells like pancakes and wood. Grandpa said wood smells like memory. I think he's right. When I grow up, I want to build a house that smells like this too. Love, Evan. Just a few short lines, but perhaps the most genuine thing I'd ever received from a grandchild. I held the letter in my hands, feeling as though I were holding a piece of the past still warm. Evan's note had been buried beneath years of receipts, the record of obligations and duties. And amid all that proof, it shone like a small drop of love that had never been asked for. I folded the letter gently and whispered, Legacy should go where love still lives. It's time to pay the love forward, not back. I sat for a while, looking around the room. Everything was still. So still I could hear the wind slipping through the cracks of the door. I remembered the nights when Robert was still alive, sitting right there, his silver hair lit by the lamp's soft glow. You know, Mags, he used to say, real love never dies. It just changes shape. Today, I finally understood. Its new shape was choice. I took Robert's notebook from the shelf and flipped through it. In the middle of a page, he had once written, Love is not a debt. It's an investment you hope won't go bankrupt. I laughed. He'd been such a practical man. Yet, at the end of his life, he still wrote about love like a poet. I set the notebook down and took a fresh sheet of paper. I wrote, Today, I understand that the price of love isn't measured by tears, but by what we dare to keep after loss. I folded the paper and placed it in the box beside Evan's letter. One generation and the next, side by side, connected by something simple, sincerity. At noon, I made Robert's favorite chicken soup. The smell of fried shallots filled the house, mingling with the lingering cedar. I set 2 bowls on the table, then hesitated. For weeks, I'd done the same, always pouring the second bowl away. But today, I left it there, neatly in place, like a quiet thank you. I took a spoonful, tasted the gentle sweetness of the broth, and the first tear dropped into the spoon, warm and a little salty. I looked around the table. The tiny scratches, the cup rings, the faded spots of varnish Robert had meant to repaint, but never got around to. Each mark was a story, a quiet proof that love isn't just words. It's habits, gestures, and all the waiting that goes unanswered. When washing the dishes, I caught my reflection in the water. The woman staring back looked different. Calm, clear-eyed, but still soft. I realized that some wounds exist only to teach us how to see ourselves again. In the afternoon, I turned on Robert's old computer. His inbox still held unread emails. Among dozens of work messages, I saw one addressed to Claire. The subject line was simple. Your mother misses you. I opened it. Claire, your mother's grown weaker. Could you come home for a few days? She just wants you to sit and share a meal. I miss your laughter. There was no reply. I turned off the screen and sat in silence. I wasn't angry anymore. I simply saw the truth. Sometimes, another silence is the answer. Afternoon light spilled across the desk, pale and golden. I looked around the room, and for a moment, I could almost see Robert standing by the doorway. watching me with that familiar look. "You know what, Rob?" I whispered. "We've paid enough for love. Now it's time for it to earn interest in the right hands." I took Evan's letter from the box and slipped it into Robert's notebook, then closed it. 2 pieces of paper, 2 moments in time, both bound by faith. Outside, the clouds were parting, revealing a thin ribbon of light along the horizon. I stood and opened the window. The wind carried in the scent of damp earth and last night's rain. I breathed deeply, feeling the cool air brush my skin. No more heaviness, no more confusion between love and obligation. I said softly, "Legacy isn't about who deserves it. It's about who remembers why it mattered." On the table, the new will lay open. Evan's name sat clearly on the last line. I placed my hand over it, and for the first time in years, felt my heart lighten, as though I had finally repaid a debt that had shadowed half a lifetime. When night came, I turned off the lights, leaving only a small candle burning. Its flame danced against the wall, flickering like memories come alive. I smiled and spoke into the quiet air. "Robert, can you hear me? We're still here. It's just that our love has found a new place to live." Outside, the rain began again, but this time, I didn't hear it as weeping. It sounded like a blessing for a woman who had finally learned that the true cost of love isn't loss, but the courage to keep what's right. I have lived alone for 3 weeks since the day I signed the revised will. The house has grown used to silence, a kind of silence that no longer frightens me, but brings a strange peace. Every morning, I make a cup of tea, open the window, and let the light pour in. I've begun to tidy up, wiping down every corner as if clearing away an old past. But this morning, there was a knock. 3 taps, light but firm. I opened the door, and Evan was standing there. Tall and thin, hoodie askew, wrinkled jeans, dark circles under his eyes. Portland's wind carried a chill, tossing his hair. "I'm sorry, Grandma," Evan said softly, eyes not quite meeting mine. "I should have come sooner." I looked at him. My heart trembled, not from emotion, but from memory. For a moment, I saw again the little boy who used to sit on the floor drawing a fish bigger than a person, grinning wide. Now he was a young man, nearly 2 heads taller than me, but his eyes were the same, honest and awkward. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, opening the door. "There's still room in the house." He stepped inside, took off his shoes, his gaze moving around the room. "This smell? It's the same." Evan smiled. "Cedar and pancakes. Grandpa used to say wood smells like memory." I smiled faintly. He said so much, and in the end, he still left before cleaning up all those memories. Evan chuckled, then fell quiet. I poured tea and set 2 cups on the table. He looked around, as if afraid his eyes alone might break something. "Grandma," he said, "I know about Mom and Dad. They didn't come to the funeral. I'm sorry." I looked down at the tea. The steam blurred the surface, so my reflection mingled with the vapor. "No need to apologize, Evan. That was their choice. Everyone has to live with what they choose." He lowered his head, silent. After a moment, he spoke softly. "Mom told me not to say anything. She said you'd be angry if you knew she didn't come. But I thought, silence is worse than lying." I lifted my head and looked him in the eye. In those eyes, I saw the clarity I'd lost long ago. "Thank you," I said. "Truth can hurt people, but lies are what ruin them." Evan nodded. His gaze wandered and stopped at our wedding photo. Did he suffer much?" I drew a long breath. "No, he went peacefully. It's the ones who stay who hurt longer." We sat in silence. The clock ticked steadily, interwoven with the breathing of two people from two generations. I suddenly felt that the distance of age was less frightening than the distance of feeling, and Evan, somehow, had bridged that gap without even trying. I stood and headed toward the kitchen. "Have you had breakfast?" "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "But I can eat anything you make." I laughed. "You sound just like your grandpa." I took out the old skillet, the one Robert used every Sunday morning. The handle was a little loose, but I never threw it away. I poured in batter, added eggs, whisked, then poured it into the pan. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen, the scent of old mornings, of a time when the family still sat around the table, laughter overlapping conversation. Evan sat at the table, watching me cook. "Grandpa used to say," I said, "that no matter how much he messed up everything else, he could still make perfect pancakes. I think it was his way of atoning for the rest of his life." He laughed. "I remember. When I was little, he let me mix the batter. I spilled half the bag on the floor. He said, 'It's okay. Pancakes taste better with a little mistake.'" I paused and turned to him. "Evan, do you know why I asked you to come today?" He shook his head. "I just thought you needed someone to talk to." I took Robert's old apron from the drawer, the faded blue one with a few flower stains. I folded it neatly and handed it to him. "Your grandpa cooked in this apron for 40 years. Today, I think it's time to pass it on." Evan took it, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Because you did what no one else would. You came without being asked. You told the truth without needing praise. And you listened with nothing to gain. Those are the only things that still matter in a family." He clenched the apron, eyes brimming. "Aren't you angry at my mom?" I sighed. "No. Anger is a form of caring. I don't have the strength to be angry anymore." Evan bowed his head, hands still tight. "I don't know what to say. But I promise I won't disappoint you." I looked at him and smiled. No one can disappoint me if they show up with honesty. I slid the pancakes onto a plate and drizzled honey on top. "Eat. You're hungry." He ate slowly, the first bite lifting the corner of his mouth. "Just like Grandpa's," he said. "Because it's the same pan," I answered softly. "Only the hand holding it is a bit older." We ate in silence. Outside the window, leaves began to fall. The wind across the eaves sounded like Robert's whisper. I looked at Evan and saw in his eyes what I used to see in my husband's years ago: unconditional trust. When we finished, he helped me wash the dishes. I said, "Evan, do you know why I chose you in the will?" He stiffened, his voice trembling. "My mom told me. She said you wanted to punish them." I smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm giving the inheritance to the one who still believes in its value. Money, the house, they're only shells. What I'm giving is trust. And only an honest person can keep it." He was quiet, then nodded. Water ran in the sink, reflecting pale light across his face. "Grandma," he said softly, "I don't know what to do to deserve it." "You don't have to do anything," I said. "You only have to show up." And you did. Sometimes, honesty is all an old woman like me needs to believe that love isn't dead. Evan lowered his head, smiling through tears. I placed my hand on his shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Don't mistake kindness for weakness. In a world full of deceit, honesty is the bravest act." He nodded, eyes shining. That afternoon, as I walked Evan to the door, he turned back and said quietly, Grandma, thank you for not giving up on me like my mom thinks you would. I smiled. No one is abandoned if they still know how to come home. When the door closed, I stood still, watching his figure fade behind the trees. In the house, the scent of pancakes and cedar twined together, warm as breath. I sat down in the armchair, my hand resting on the old apron still lying on the table. Robert, I whispered, do you see? The boy has come back, and he brought with him what this whole house had lost: honesty. Outside, the rain began to fall light and steady. I closed my eyes and listened. No more loneliness, only gratitude. The house was so quiet I could hear the wind slipping through the window frame. Winter had come to Portland, and the air carried the damp scent of decaying leaves. The chill crept into every joint. I boiled water, poured tea, and stood watching the steam rise from the cup. In that mist, I saw Robert's silhouette, faint, dissolving, vanishing like a dream too long left unspoken. For 3 weeks, I had grown used to emptiness. I cleaned the house, trimmed the hedge, and spent evenings writing in my notebook. I no longer waited for phone calls or checked the inbox for messages. I simply lived, quietly, simply, like someone who had walked through the storm and finally accepted the calm that followed. This morning, just as I set down my cup, I heard the doorbell. 3 chimes, sharp, familiar enough to make my heart tighten. I looked through the curtain, a silver SUV parked in the drive. Claire. I wasn't surprised. I knew this day would come. But something inside me still recoiled, a mix of tenderness and fatigue. When I opened the door, Claire stood there, perfect as ever. Expensive coat, carefully curled blonde hair, perfume so heavy it drowned out the cedar scent of the house. She looked immaculate, as if everything around her existed to frame her image. "Mom," she said, her voice crisp, "why did you change the will?" The question sliced through the air like a pair of scissors. No greeting, no trace of sorrow, only demand. I stood still, my hand on the door, not opening it fully. "Claire, are you here to ask or to accuse?" She frowned. "Don't play games, Mom. David told me everything. You changed the will. You cut us out." "What the hell were you thinking?" Her tone was sharp, commanding, like I was one of her subordinates. I exhaled and opened the door a little wider. "If you want to talk, come in, but keep your voice down. This is a home, not a stage for your victim act." She stepped inside. Her heels struck the wooden floor, echoing through the silence like the heartbeat of anger. She looked around the room. The photo frames, Robert's armchair, the tea table. Everything old, but spotless. I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes, as though she sensed there was something here money could not reclaim. "Mom, how could you do this? To your own children?" I smiled faintly and poured the tea. A good question. But maybe I should ask another. What have you done to make you believe this legacy still belongs to you? "We've always been there when it mattered," she snapped, too fast, like a rehearsed line. I set my cup down, calm. "When it mattered, but only when it mattered to you, right?" Her face flushed. She said nothing. I went on, my voice soft, steady as steel. "Do you remember last Christmas, Claire? When I needed to go to my heart appointment? You promised to drive me. Robert had to cancel a chemotherapy session to take me instead. You sent a text. 'Sorry, Mom. Work. Emergency.' Then you sent flowers." I paused. "Robert coughed up blood in the car that day, Claire, and you posted photos from your office party." Silence. Her face paled, her lips trembled. In her eyes flickered that dangerous mix, shame and defiance. Mom, I raised a hand. No need. I'm not blaming you. I'm just reminding you. Sometimes forgetting is its own kind of cruelty. She sat down, gripping her purse. We were busy, Mom. You know how life is. We didn't mean to hurt you. I looked straight at her. That's exactly the point. You didn't mean to, but you did. And the worst part is, it didn't trouble you long enough to change anything. The room fell silent again. The clock ticked. The wind brushed the glass outside. Claire bit her lip, looking down. I could see her fighting tears, pride holding them in. Mom, she said hoarsely, you can't do this to us. It's unfair. We're your family. I let out a soft laugh, one tinged with sadness. Family, Claire. Family isn't a place you come back to only when there's money to claim or a point to prove. It's where you come, even when there's nothing left to take. She rose, her voice rising, almost shouting, So, this is your revenge? After everything we've done for you? I stood across from her, my voice low but clear. Done for me? Claire, you've never done anything for me. You've done things that make you feel better about yourself. She stepped back, as if struck. Her hands trembled. She inhaled sharply, regaining her poise. Mom, you're cruel. I shook my head. No, darling, peace isn't cruel. It just comes late. She was silent. Our eyes met, not mother and daughter anymore, but two strangers studying the wreckage of their shared inheritance, one holding ambition, the other, empty memory. Mom, her voice cracked. I don't even know who you are anymore, I replied quietly. And I don't know who you are either, Claire. Maybe we both changed. The difference is, I'm no longer afraid to be honest. I walked to the door and opened it. Go home. Not because I'm sending you away, but because I know, if you stay, you'll keep defending your image instead of listening, and I don't want to witness that anymore. She hesitated, then nodded faintly. Maybe you're right. Her voice softened. But one day, you'll regret this. I smiled. Maybe. But if I do, I'll regret it in peace, not an illusion. She turned and walked out quickly. The door closed, the cold wind slipping in, rattling the curtain. I stood there, watching her figure disappear down the path littered with dead leaves. Part of me wanted to run after her, to hold her like when she was small. But the other part, the one that had just learned how to live truthfully, whispered, Enough. I closed the door and turned the lock. The faint click sounded small, but inside me, it echoed, like the end of a long chapter. I folded the cloth on the chair, set it straight. The house returned to stillness. I poured another cup of tea. The warmth spread softly, like Robert's arms once did. I opened my notebook and wrote, Today, my daughter came home not to remember, but to reclaim. She left with nothing. But maybe she took the truth. Peace isn't cruel. It just arrives late. I set down my pen and looked up at the ceiling. One tear slipped down, not from sorrow but from relief. I thought I was ready for everything. Even the silence from my children after they learned about the new will. But life always knows how to test you one more time, just when you think you've made peace. That morning, Portland was drenched in heavy rain. It hammered against the eaves, fierce and rhythmic, as if the sky itself were trying to wash away all the things left unsaid. I sat in the living room, breathing in the damp scent of cedar mingled with half-brewed coffee. The house was quiet, yet within that quiet I felt something drawing near. An engine outside, a car door slamming. then footsteps. Quick, deliberate. I sighed. I didn't need to look. I knew it was David. My son had never known how to knock gently. And right on cue, the doorbell rang. 3 short, firm chimes. I opened the door. David stood there, soaked from the rain but still in a suit. Monica was beside him, heels sinking into the gravel, face perfectly made up, her expression a mix of pity and pride. They brought no flowers, no greeting, only tension. "Mom," David said, his voice low but tight. "We need to talk." I nodded. "About the will, I assume?" He gripped his briefcase strap and nodded again. Monica spoke first, her tone soft but sharp as a blade. "We understand you have your reasons, but giving everything to Evan, don't you think that was a little hasty? He's just a kid." I poured tea, setting 3 cups on the table. Being young isn't a flaw. Being careless is. David sat down, trying to sound measured. "Mom, he's 19. He doesn't know how to manage property, money, taxes, any of this. He'll waste it." "Maybe," I said. "But at least he'll waste it with gratitude, not with indifference." Monica laced her fingers together. "You know we're not talking about money, Mrs. Allen. We just want to make sure things are handled fairly." I smiled faintly. "Fairly? You both love that word. But what does fair mean, Monica? Splitting assets equally, or sharing responsibility equally? Did either of you ever share the burden of pain with me?" Silence. Outside, the rain kept falling. Heavy, unrelenting. David drew a breath. "Mom, this isn't about love or pain. It's about protecting what Dad built. He would want—" I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. "No, David. Your father spent his life protecting love, not wealth. He understood that money only matters when paired with decency. Do you think he'd want to see you here, speaking like this, over a will?" David clenched his fists, then forced them open. "Mom, I don't want to argue, but you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. Evans manipulated you. He made you feel sorry for him." I laughed, a low, dry sound. "Pity? Evan never asked me for anything, David. He just sat beside me and asked one question. 'Are you okay?' You, on the other hand, your first question was, 'What did you do with the money?' Tell me, if you were me, who would you trust?" He bit his lip and looked away. Monica touched his arm, a silent warning to stay composed. "Mom," she said softly, "I truly respect you. We just want to make sure Evan isn't being taken advantage of. A large inheritance can ruin a person." I met her gaze. "How strange, Monica. You believe money can ruin people, and yet you still think you need it." She froze. David's tone sharpened. "Mom, enough. This is our family's legacy, not some morality exercise." I set my teacup down gently. "Exactly, David. It's a legacy. Which means it should go to the one who still understands its meaning. A legacy isn't wealth. It's the story of how we lived and loved. And if you can't grasp that, you're not meant to hold it." David shot up, eyes reddening. "Can't you see you're tearing this family apart?" I looked up at him. "The family tore itself apart long ago, David. I'm just the first to admit it." He turned away, then back again, voice breaking. "Mom, I've worked my whole life. I didn't live nearby because I had to provide for my family. Why can't you understand that?" I stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I do understand, David. You chose your work. You chose stability. But every choice has a cost. You chose absence. I chose clarity. Don't ask me to pay for what you've already spent." Monica stood, her tone gentler now. "Please, we don't want conflict. We just want you to reconsider. Maybe not change everything, just make it more balanced. I looked at her. Balanced for whom, Monica? For those who came to demand? Or for the man who died without seeing his children one last time? No one spoke. Outside, the rain turned to hail, tapping hard against the roof. Each sound hit like a heartbeat. David lowered his head. So, that's it? You're cutting us off? After everything we've done for you? I smiled sadly. Done for me? Did you ever take me to the hospital? Call your father during chemo? You sent cards. Evan sent his time. Don't talk about what you've done, David. Talk about what you haven't. He was silent. Monica stepped back slightly, realizing that any defense now would only deepen the wound. I turned back to the table, opened my notebook to a blank page. You came here to negotiate, but what I have isn't up for negotiation. I'm not giving to be thanked, and I'm not withholding to punish. I'm just choosing peace for the rest of my life. I wrote a few lines, then read aloud. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the decision to stop fighting for what was never mine to keep. David stood still, watching me. I saw something shift in his eyes. Not anger, but understanding. Fleeting though it was. Mom, he said quietly, maybe you're right, but it still hurts. I set down my pen and smiled gently. Pain is a good sign. It means your heart is still there. Monica took his hand. Let's go, she whispered. He nodded, but before leaving, he turned back, voice tight. I hope someday you'll forgive us. I smiled faintly. Forgiveness isn't needed, David. Understanding is. I don't hold grudges. I hold truth. The door closed behind them. A draft slipped through the gap, carrying the scent of rain. I sat back in Robert's armchair, feeling the weight of years finally lift from my shoulders. No triumph, no bitterness, just a gentle stillness. I looked out of the window. The storm was easing, the gray sky slowly parting, a fragile light pushing through. I whispered, This isn't punishment, Robert. This is my peace. And I earned it. Then I added one final line in my notebook. They came to negotiate inheritance. I offered them my silence instead. Sometimes, silence is the only deal worth making. I closed the notebook and switched off the lamp. In the darkness, I heard the clock ticking, the wind brushing the trees, and the steady, calm rhythm of my own heart. I had paid dearly for my freedom, but for the first time in years, I truly owned it. That morning, the Portland sky was impossibly clear. After weeks of cold gray rain, the first sunlight slipped down the porch steps, thin and golden like old paper. I stood by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the dew fade from the railing. The little house was silent, but no longer somber. Perhaps when one stops fighting loneliness, it ceases to be an enemy. I hadn't heard from David or Claire since the day they left. Their silence used to ache, but now it feels like a gift. Silence can be an apology, if one is mature enough to understand it. I walked down the hall and entered Robert's study. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, resting on the old wooden desk where he used to spend hours writing. The air still carried the scent of cedar, laced with the faint musk of old paper. The room, though empty, still had a soul. I pulled open the bottom drawer, looking for a few bills to shred. A yellow envelope slipped out, its seal a little wrinkled. On it, written in uneven blue ink, to Grandma, from Evan. The handwriting made me smile, imperfect but honest. I opened it, a long letter, folded in thirds, slightly crumpled, as if it had lived in his coat pocket all day before he mailed it. Grandma, I don't really know how to start this. I just wanted to say thank you. I heard about the will. Mom's furious, but that's nothing new. I just, I don't know if I deserve any of it. I'm not good at school or money or pretending like everyone else. But I'll try, Grandma. I promise. I'll take care of the house, the garden, and that stupid old fence Grandpa loved. I'll visit. I'll show up. Grandpa once told me that showing up is half of love. I guess that's all I can do right now. Love, Evan. I read it again, each word sinking into me. What love could be simpler than just showing up? And yet, that was what I'd been waiting for all these years. I set the letter down, my hand trembling. A tear fell, blurring the word love. I smiled, realizing that love can soak into paper if you give it enough time. I looked up at Robert's photo. He was smiling in his old suit, his eyes as kind as I remembered every morning. Do you hear that, Robert? I whispered. Someone finally said what we've been waiting our whole lives to hear. I sat down and opened his old journal. The pages were yellowed, but the cover still smelled faintly of wood. I wrote, "Legacy isn't about money or houses. It's about who still remembers the smell of pancakes on Sunday morning." I closed the book and leaned back in the chair, eyes shut. In the quiet, I could hear the wind, the ticking clock, and, somewhere, faintly, Robert's laughter woven through memory. By noon, I made chicken and potato soup, his favorite. I still set 2 bowls on the table. It no longer felt like a ritual of loss. Now, the second bowl stood for a different kind of presence, silent but whole. As I washed the dishes, the phone rang, a strange number. I dried my hands and answered. "Hello? Grandma?" Evan's voice, young and hesitant. "It's you?" "Yes. I wasn't sure if you got my letter." I laughed softly like the breeze. "I'm on my 4th read already." He chuckled on the other end. "It's a pretty bad letter, isn't it?" "No, sweetheart. It's real. And real is enough." A pause. Then he said, "I miss Grandpa. I miss the kitchen. I want to fix the old fence. Will you let me?" I looked out the window at the weathered fence, pale and soft from the rain. "Your grandpa used to say, 'That fence is weak, but loyal. If you want to fix it, come. I'll make tea, and you can do the heavy work.'" He laughed, clear and sincere. "Deal." When the call ended, I was still smiling. Some conversations are simple, yet they can heal a lifetime. Afternoon settled in. I stepped out to the porch. The sunlight spilled across the table, across the empty chair. I opened the window to Robert's study. The golden light poured in, warm as honey. Dust drifted through it like small spirits finding their way home. I picked up our wedding photo, wiped the thin layer of dust from the glass. In it, Robert held my hand, and I was laughing with my eyes closed. "See?" I whispered. "The light still knows how to come back." Later that evening, I called Sarah, the old friend I'd drifted away from, too proud to understand her grief. Her voice was the same as always, calm, a little tired. "It's me, Maggie." "Sarah," I said softly, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For judging you. I used to think you were weak for letting your daughter take all your savings. Now, I understand. Some losses don't live in bank accounts, but in the heart." There was a pause. Then her voice trembled. "So, you finally understand?" "Yes. But I chose differently. I don't want to die bitter. I want to live what's left in peace." On the other end, she began to cry. "I'm glad for you, Maggie. Not everyone finds their way out." After the call, I sat quietly for a long while, listening to the clock's steady rhythm. The house no longer felt like a place of sorrow. It had become a witness to forgiveness for others and for myself. I picked up Evan's letter again and read it one more time. At the bottom, I noticed a smaller line I hadn't seen before. P.S. Grandma, if Grandpa's listening, tell him I'll take care of the pancakes. I'll even use his old pan. I laughed through my tears. That boy, naive, honest, understood something it had taken me a lifetime to learn. Love doesn't live in grand gestures, but in the small things we keep repeating, long after anyone's watching. I added a line beneath my old note. The world doesn't need another miracle. It just needs one honest grandson who still believes pancakes can fix a broken heart. Night fell. I didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight through the window was soft, like Robert's hand on my shoulder when he used to whisper, "Everything will be all right." I looked around the house, every corner, every object, and for the first time, it felt warm. Not from the fireplace, but from memories that no longer hurt. "Thank you, Robert," I murmured. "Thank you for teaching me that true love never disappears. It just finds someone new to live in." Outside, the night wind moved through the trees, making a faint sound like a lullaby. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and smiled. At last, I could live in this house without feeling left behind, because love, somehow, had found its way home again. This morning, I woke earlier than usual. Spring light slipped through the curtains, soft as breath. Portland had begun to warm after a long stretch of cold days. The trees out front were budding again, the grass turning green, and somewhere in the garden I heard a woodpecker tapping. A small sound, but to me, it felt like a song of life returning. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. As the water boiled, the scent filled the kitchen, blending with the old wooden smell of the house. I sat in Robert's chair, the one I used to avoid because I couldn't bear the emptiness beside it. Now I sit there, not for memory, but for peace. Outside, the air carried the last chill of winter. Then I saw a small truck pull up at the gate. Evan. He stepped out, wearing a canvas jacket, a tool bag slung over his shoulder, his face sun-dusted. Seeing him, I suddenly remembered Robert at 20. The same bright eyes, the same quiet steadiness. "Grandma!" he called, his voice bright and warm. "I'm here. Come in, dear," I answered, smiling. He climbed the porch steps, pulling off his gloves and giving me a quick, firm hug. "You look better, Grandma," he said. "Feels like this house is healing both of us." I laughed. "Not the house, the presence of someone real." He grinned, glancing around. "That old fence is in bad shape, but the wood underneath is still solid. I'll just replace a few boards. No need to rebuild everything." I nodded, looking out at the yard. Robert had built that fence himself, the year David moved out. He'd said, "When people leave, we need something that stays." Now, the fence stood crooked, paint faded, but still surviving through years of storms. I sighed softly. Maybe it's time it gets to rest. Evan opened his toolbox and began to measure, saw, and hammer. The rhythmic knock of wood echoed through the yard, mingling with the wind. I sat on the porch steps, tea in hand, watching him work. Each strike of the hammer felt like it was mending a part of memory. When he pried off the old planks, the scent of sap rose. Sharp, earthy, alive. Without looking up, he said, "Grandpa once told me that if something can be fixed, you shouldn't throw it away." I smiled. "And do you know what he'd say if it couldn't be fixed?" Evan paused. looking over. He'd say, "Then let's use it for firewood." Evan laughed, and his laughter made the house feel young again. By noon, I made pancakes, the kind Robert used to cook every Sunday. I still used his old pan, the handle loose but familiar. I'd never replaced it. Its imperfection was part of what made it ours. Evan walked into the kitchen, the smell of butter and flour filling the air. "Grandma, it smells just like when I was a kid." I turned, pretending to scold him. "You mean when you used to sneak bites before breakfast?" He grinned. "And Grandpa covered for me." "He always did," I said. "He thought love meant protecting." Evan smiled. "And you think love means facing it." I set the pancakes on a plate, my voice soft. "Yes. But I only learned that after staying silent too many times." We sat down to eat. Sunlight spilled across the wooden table, catching on old scratches, marks of time, but also of existence. Evan ate hungrily, honey glistening at the corner of his mouth. Between bites, he asked, "Grandma, were you ever afraid of being alone?" I thought for a moment. I used to be. I was terrified. But I learned something. Loneliness doesn't kill anyone. It only kills those who refuse to face themselves. He nodded quietly, then asked, "Do you ever regret not forgiving Mom and Dad?" I set my fork down and looked straight at him. Forgiveness is only a gift when the receiver still values it. I hold no grudges, Evan, but I don't force forgiveness either. Clarity is its own kind of kindness. He pressed his lips together, understanding. I saw in his eyes something Robert once had, a gentle honesty. That afternoon, we painted the fence together. The scent of fresh paint drifted through the yard, mixing with the smell of soil and wild daisies. I noticed the small yellow flowers growing by the tree and said, "You know, when I was your age, I thought love was something to keep at all costs. Now I know. Sometimes you have to let go to keep it whole." Evan was quiet, brushing paint in steady strokes. "I think I get it. I tried to hold on to Mom by lying to her, but the tighter I held, the farther she went." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "If you try to keep people through fear, you lose both of you. But if you keep them through truth, even when they leave, they stay." By evening, the sun dipped low, spilling gold across the new fence. Evan stepped back, admiring his work. "It's done," he said. "Grandpa would be proud." I smiled. "No, he'd say it's crooked and secretly fix it later. But yes, he'd be proud." We sat together on the porch, silent. The sound of insects hummed through the air, and the faint scent of cedar drifted from the trees. Evan looked at me. "Grandma, do you think you've won?" "Won against who?" I asked. "Life. Or maybe yourself." I smiled. "I didn't win, Evan. I just stopped losing." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I understand." When he drove away, snow began to fall. Light, fleeting flakes, melting as they touched the ground. I stood on the porch, watching his truck disappear down the road. The sound of the engine faded into quiet. Inside, the kitchen glowed in the sunset. I took out the small wooden box Robert once used to store letters. Inside was my wedding ring, the one I'd removed the day he died. I placed it beside a slip of paper he had written long ago. "Love doesn't end. It changes hands." I closed the box and set it on the shelf. "You see, Robert? I found someone to hold it for us." I brewed another cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the snow drift across the porch. My heart felt light. Not waiting, not mourning, just calm, like the sea after a long storm. I opened my notebook and wrote, Peace isn't found, it's earned, and I have finally paid the price. I set the pen down, leaned back, and closed my eyes. Outside, the new fence stood straight and shining under the moonlight. The wind brushed against it, making a soft sound, like Robert's voice whispering, "You did it, Mags." I smiled into the silence. "No, Robert," I whispered back. "We did it." The house fell quiet again, the kind of quiet I had spent a lifetime earning. But this time, it wasn't frightening. It was the reward. Perhaps the gentlest form of revenge isn't making others suffer. It's living peacefully while they're still searching for someone to blame. Maggie didn't win against anyone. She simply stopped losing. And you? If one day you had to choose between forgiveness and freedom, whom would you keep? Them or yourself? Share your thoughts, not to argue, but to remind ourselves that sometimes peace itself is an act of courage.